Hello and welcome everybody to the new National Trends in Disability Employment, or nTIDE Lunch and Learn series. On the first Friday of every month, corresponding with the Bureau of Labor Statistics Jobs Report, we'll be offering this live broadcast via Zoom webinar to share the results of the latest nTIDE findings. In addition, we will provide news and updates from the field on disability employment, as well as host panelists who will discuss current disability-related findings and events. So just a few housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar is being recorded. We will post an archive of each of our webinars each month at our website, www.researchondisability.org/nTIDE. This site will also provide copies of the presentations today, the panelist bios, full transcripts, and other valuable resources. As an attendee of this webinar, you are a viewer and no sound is enabled. To ask questions of the panelists, simply click on the Q&A box on your webinar screen and type your questions into the box. Panelists will review these questions during the assigned question and answer periods.
Hi everybody, this is Andrew Houtenveld. Welcome to the October nTIDE, where we're going to be reporting the latest numbers for September from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we'll also be hearing from several people, including Meredith Dodona at the Office of Disability Employment Policy at the U.S. Department of Labor. So with that in mind, let's see, advance the slides. There, oop, too fast. So as the recording might have said, the monthly nTIDE occurs every noon on the first Friday of every month, pretty much the first Friday of every month. Sometimes the Bureau of Labor Statistics delays it a week when the month ends, the previous month ends on, a Thursday or Friday. It's a joint effort with the Helsel Foundation, University of New Hampshire, and the Association of Centers on Disability. And we're funded by nTIDE, which is the Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Employment Policy and Measurement, which is the center that funds it, and the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. nTIDE is the grant, provides the grant for this project. You're going to hear from John O'Neill, and you'll also hear back from me in the first section to report the latest results. Then in part two, you'll get news from Denise Roselle at AUCD and her guests, plural, Megan Helsel and Mary Lee West. Then we'll hear from our guest speaker from ODEP, Meredith Dodona. And at the end, we'll have question and answer time. So save up your questions. You also have the ability to ask questions in the Q&A section, and sometimes we're able to answer things via that mechanism when everyone else is talking. So I'm going to turn it over to John O'Neill. John, take it away.
Thank you, Andrew. Good day, everybody. The nTIDE report is, as Andrew mentioned, a monthly report. It's basically a press release and an infographic looking at the latest employment statistics. More specifically, those statistics focus on the employment to population ratio, which is just those individuals who are working relative to the total population. And then we also report out on the employment participation rate, which includes those who are working, but also those who are looking. And again, it's relative to the total population. The nTIDE report uses data from the jobs report, which is released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics on the first Friday, typically, of every month. And it is a joint effort since early 2013 of the Helsel Foundation and the University of New Hampshire. We were reminiscing this morning that in the spring of next year, it'll be 5 years that we will have been producing this report. The data source, the next slide, please, Andrew.
Oops, I'm getting there.
the date, well, one back. Okay, thanks. The source of the data that we use is from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, which we had already mentioned, and it is the current population survey. And the CPS is the source of the official unemployment rate, which so much is made of on this day by the media. And it includes civilians ages 16 to 64 who are not living in institutions. And this information has been available since September 2008 onward. And that was the first time that the CPS included the 6 disability questions. It is not seasonally adjusted, and that as of yet, which is why we compare to the same month the previous year. Andrew, I'll hand it back to you, and you can report the numbers.
All right, thank you, John. So let's see. All right, so the numbers. The employment to population ratio increased for people with disabilities from 28.0% to 30.4%. This is an 8.6% increase, or in other words, it's a, let's see if I can get my video working. It says that John is the active speaker. How do I get mine? There I am. I'm the active speaker now. Ooh, but I'm seeing my whole face. I don't want to do that. Hold on a second. There we go. All right. So the employment to population ratio increased from 28.0% to 30.4%. Again, that's a 2.4 percentage point increase. That's quite substantial. Is good following on the heels of last month. The population for people without disabilities, it went up slightly. It went up 1.1%, or 1/8 of a percentage point, from 73 to 73.8%. So this is similar to what we've been finding, and as John pointed out in the nTIDE report, what is this, John, 17 or 18 months, I think? He's muted.
It's a year and a half.
A year and a half, 18 months. So,
18 months.
Good news. And I'll go through the trend a little bit. So the next slide has the labor force participation, which includes not just people who are working, but people who are looking for work. And again, this went up from 31 to 33.1%. For people without disabilities, it went up very slightly from 76.5 to 76.9%. So that's quite, again, a stark contrast, and it's good to see. Here's the long-term trend of the employment to population ratio. So as John mentioned, they started collecting data back in September. They started reporting in September of 2008. That's just after the Great Recession is really hitting. It's, you know, you can see the effects of the Great Recession for both people with and without disabilities. And then over a period of from, say, 2010, 2011, the employment starts picking up for people without disabilities and starts to recover. And for people without disabilities, it continues up until 2013, beginning of 2014. And this is right when we started doing the nTIDE. So this was rather a bleak look at what we were expecting to see. Not saying that the nTIDE caused this to go up, of course, but once we got past 2000 and say into 2015, we reached this kind of slow point, but then we start seeing a rise in 2016 and 17, and we continue to see this rather stark increase. And so that's quite good. it's still not to the level, if we kind of isolate this a little bit, it's still not to the level of 2008, certainly not up to where we're kind of the pre-recession, almost at the pre-recession level. For people without disabilities, they've pretty much caught back up to 2008. And so you may remember, you know, the long, slow recovery during the Obama years that was constantly mentioned. That's what we're seeing in this rise, slow rise. And we're only starting to see that rise, say, from 2015 on for people without disabilities. And so this is promising in my view, in part because when I've used data, these data aren't available for prior to 2008. When I've used other data, you know, a lot of times people with disabilities don't recover from disabilities, recover from recessions. And it's kind of this step down all the time. And this was really good to see. A number of questions have come in. We'll do our best to address those as on the fly or save them to the Q&A section. So I'm going to turn it over to Denise. Denise, it's all yours.
Unmute. Perfect. Thanks so much, John. So why don't you flip to the first, go ahead and flip to the first slide. We're going to be talking today, whoops, there you go. Since it is, and we kind of have a theme going on today, you'll hear with the speaker later and with our guests as well, around National Disability Employment Awareness Month, which is October. So I thought I would stick with that as well. And I have a number of things to share with you today that are new from the various technical assistance centers, ODEP funded projects, other things that are out there that you may not have seen yet, and if you haven't, I hope you go look at them. First one is building on something I talked about last week. I talked about something around cultural and linguistic diversity last month, and this month there's a new guide out from NTACD, the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, that is a quick guide on supporting culturally and linguistically diverse youth in transition. This one, as the slide says, it addresses topics relevant to students with disabilities at the secondary level. And there are a bunch of strategies, resources, tools for different audiences. What that means is there's specific tips that you can apply depending on who you are. There are tips for school folks and school professionals in the schools. There are tips specifically for transition specialists. There are some specifically for VR counselors. And then there are some specifically targeted toward families. And it's a really nice, easy to read, straightforward guide. It's got some good resources. It's got a nice bibliography in it. I really recommend it to you. It's a good new product from NTACD. Next slide, John. So the next one, this one is from the National Collaboration on Workforce Development. Whoops, back one. Back one, there you go, the info brief. So this one's from the National Collaboration on Workforce Development, which is an ODEP funded project. This one specifically is on designing professional development for youth workforce development. And I want to make sure I'm clear that this is for the professionals who are in the youth workforce development field. It's got 3 really nice case studies. One from Ohio, kind of a train the trainer model, one from that was tested in Maryland, in Baltimore City, in Los Angeles, and in New York City, that's more of a cross-agency training, and one from DC that I can't see in my notes. So there were 3 of them in any case. Again, really nice detailed explanation of how the projects worked. There's some good evaluation on what they thought afterwards about each of these types of case studies, and how to train the folks who are actually doing this work and how to support them in the work they're doing. Certainly under WIOA, there is a huge push toward transition age youth. So we need a lot more professionals in that arena, and a lot of the things we're asking of those professionals are somewhat different than we had asked, or at least the emphasis is different than it has been in the past. So this is a really nice piece out of the NCWD, and it also has some ideas about how to do replication. So again, another one from an ODEP funded project. Next slide. This was a CMS guidance. We've talked a lot on these calls about the ABLE Act at various times and about financial security and financial management and all of there you go. Financial management and all of those. CMS this week or this month came out with a new guidance on ABLE accounts. And it's one of those things that I would really recommend to any of you who are working with folks who are on Medicaid, folks on SSI, that you have just stuck in your desk somewhere, because at some point a question is going to be coming up about how ABLE accounts work with Medicaid. This was directed straight to the Medicaid directors. It's a nice thing to carry around with you and say, here it is. ABLE accounts supplement but don't supplant public benefits, such as Medicaid or SSI. And here's where CMS said it. So this is it's straightforward. It's directed to Medicaid directors. It's one of those things I would suggest. It also talks about distributions as well as contributions. So it's one of those things I would just hold on to. I'm sticking it in my file, my ABLE file, frankly. Okay, next one. Jan. I'm guessing that everybody on this call knows about the Job Accommodations Network. Since 2004, Jan has been doing their annual study on workplace accommodations. The new one for 2017 is now out. Again, it's another one of those things that I stick in my file so that I have it on hand for any work I'm doing with businesses or business owners or talking about accommodations. This is the new version. It's always good to have the up-to-date one. The majority, that is 59% of workplace accommodations, cost nothing according to this one. 36% have a one-time only cost. Only 4% have an ongoing cost. And the typical one-time expenditure for 2017 is about $500. And then when they ask the question, well, how much would you normally spend for a worker who wouldn't necessarily need that kind of accommodation, the answer is $300. So there's not all that much of a difference for an employer. So this is another one that I would stick in my pile, have available. I wanted to make sure you knew that the new one was out. Next slide, Andrew. So there's also on the WIOA, Department of Labor, ODEP, Employment First web portal, there's a new tool that is looking at where ODEP has analyzed all of the WIOA state plans based on 12 elements. And you can click on any state and click on the WIOA profile header and get all kinds of information about the WIOA state plan. You can actually download the entire WIOA state plan for that state. And for those of you who are working on WIOA, I mean, it gives you the numbers too, and I've talked about the fact that you can find numbers and folks, percentages of people employed. There's all kinds of state information when you click on that, but now you can also get the WIOA state plan. You can also download the WIOA profile. Again, to the extent, as many of you on this call know, I'm a policy geek. That's what I do. That's what I love. When you go in and talk to somebody about when you go in and talk to your VR director, about how WIOA is doing and what you're doing in WIOA, when you go in and talk with legislators to talk about the impact that WIOA is making on employment in your state, lots of the numbers that you're going to want and need are available right here. And all you have to do is go in and click on it. This is another one that I use all the time. Those are and lastly, and I don't have a slide for this one, I would be remiss if I didn't say, since I am from AUCD, if I didn't say that I hope I see a lot of folks on this call. The AUCD annual meeting is coming up in early November, the 5th through the 8th here in DC. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that I hope I see a bunch of you there. You can still register online. And if you are there, come find me, because I'd love to meet some of you and hear what you're talking about in your states, what's going on WIOA or anything else. And what you think of the nTIDE calls and what kinds of things you'd like to hear about on the nTIDE calls when I try and pull out all kinds of information to share with you. So come, there will be, and we'll also have stuff online afterwards that we may focus on. Lots of good programming and lots of folks coming over, I think around 1,000 people. So I'd be remiss if I didn't invite y'all and say, I hope you come. That's it. I normally, next slide, Andrew, normally the guest interview is my purview, but I am thrilled to toss it back to John O'Neill for this one. John is at Helsel, and he and a couple of guests are going to be the interviewees for this month. As you know, we generally interview someone with a disability who is employed to talk about what's that been like, how you got there, how it all works. And as I said, this one also ties, these folks tie back into the whole conversation we're having about ODEP, National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and stay at work, return to work, stay at work. So I'm going to toss it to you, John. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to get visual and I can't for some reason. Can you all hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, John.
We can hear you, John.
Okay, and I'll try and get visual as well, but I can't seem to get it. Okay. I'm going to introduce Mary Lee West and Megan Helsel. We, meaning the Kessler Foundation, has a pilot project at the Kessler Institute for Rehabilitation Medicine. And Mary Lee West is heading this project. It's an early intervention, return to work, stay at work project where we're working with inpatients on the spinal cord injury unit and then following them for a couple of years after discharge to basically provide, service facilitation and over that period of time with the target of people returning to work or in some cases going to work for the first time. So I'd like to hand it over to Mary Lee West, who's going to interview Megan Helsel. And Megan was an inpatient who sustained a spinal cord injury. And so I'll hand it over to Mary Lee and Megan.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Megan, for being here today. Really appreciate the time you've taken from work, because in fact you are back to work. But a year ago, it was quite different. A year ago is when I met you. As Dr. O'Neill was saying, I met you as an inpatient. At the time, I asked you, so tell me about your work. And you said, I'll tell you about my dream job, because that's what I do. This is my dream job. And I intend to go back to my dream job. So tell me just a little bit about the work that you do and the passion you have for it.
So I work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture for wildlife services as a wildlife technician. Basically what my specific position entails is managing wildlife population within a county park system. So having a spinal cord injury and trying to think about going back to work, walking in the woods or walking far distances in parks or kayaking was kind of scary, but we were able to do it and get back.
That's right. So your work involved a lot of physical activity, a great deal of your own strength, determination on a daily basis. So let's just say, as we're going back a year in time, tell us how that event that you experienced a year ago, I believe you were in Florida. You were hiking, doing what you love. You had a long drive back home to New Jersey, and then something happened that kind of brought this dream job to a temporary halt.
Yeah, so my boyfriend and I were on vacation in Florida, hiking and kayaking and fishing, doing everything that we do daily. And I drove back most of the way, and he slept. So when we got home and my back was hurting, I kind of blamed him. But I went to the doctor, and they also kind of attributed it to the driving. But over the course of that week, I started experiencing the first day my foot dropped. The next day, my left leg stopped working, and then the following day, my right leg went numb as well. So I went to the hospital, and they did an MRI and found that I had a hemangioma that we were unaware of, rupture in my spinal cord, and then I was going to have spinal cord surgery. My first question to the doctor was, "But when am I going to be able to kayak again?" And we didn't think, that I would walk or kayak or get to do any of the things that I like to do. But then through rehab at Helsel, I'm finding a way to kind of adapt and make it work, even though it's not the same as it was, exactly the same as it was before the surgery.
That's right, not exactly the same. And you needed a significant amount of time in order to do that. So I'm going to go back to, like, what was it like when you had that conversation with your boss, when you're trying to explain what had just happened and how that might impact your work?
I would say the best word is devastating.
Yeah.
I absolutely love what I do. Again, like, I would kayak all day or hike and walk and go home and do those same things. It was very much my entire life. I worked hard to get there through school and volunteer work and getting to get to that position. So I felt like it was kind of being completely taken away, and I didn't know how I was going to be able to adapt at that time to be able to get back to the job.
Absolutely. And your boss said to you, when you had that conversation about what you were experiencing, what kind of support did your supervisor impact?
Yeah, my state director and the entire program were very supportive from the very beginning, visiting me at rehab, and then finding different programs. U.S. Department of Agriculture has a leave donation program, so they sent out an email asking for leave donations. I ended up getting an overwhelming 8 months of leave donated to me, so I was able to not have to worry about being paid, not have to worry about losing my insurance, and then they were very supportive in transitioning to coming back to work. They had a temp in my position, so I worked with him 1 day a week and then 2 days a week, and just kept increasing while I built my stamina back up to be able to tolerate working until I was able to go back full time.
That's right. And how did you build up your stamina? What was your plan?
I don't think I really had a good plan. I mean,
At Helsel, you combined your passion for work with their ability to help you. How did that work?
We did some very creative physical therapy. They had to figure out ways to kind of simulate kayaking, lifting the kayak. I remember like sitting on a bolster with some kind of pole, I don't know the name of it, and like literally acting like I was rowing just to work on my balance, squatting with bolsters with weights tied around them. They would put foam mats out for me to try to walk on, like simulating uneven surfaces. We did go outside and walk on some of the grounds. They found very creative ways to simulate a job that I'm sure that they haven't experienced in their rehab days.
Right, so they use that excellent problem-solving skills to help you help yourself and get back to work. So tell me about some of the equipment that you're using right now that helps you in your job, maybe equipment you never had any even awareness of before.
I think the biggest thing would be the kayak cart. I walk with either canes or walking poles. Short distances, I still can't go long distances, but having to move the kayak from my truck into the water has kind of been a trial and error situation. I can either back the truck up to the water and drop the tailgate and kind of throw the kayak in, or then we bought a kayak cart that the kayak can sit on, and then I tie it to my waist and pull it like an ox kind of to the water if I can't get the truck there. Getting in the kayak is not as easy because it's hard to, even with the canes, to kind of like lower myself down. So I kind of just like trust fall into the kayak until I can move my legs in and launch.
So you're using adaptive equipment that can be used in many different ways. You're using canes?
Canes or walking sticks.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier something about being in the water. How do you maintain stability in the water? Out there in your waders.
We off work. I don't really have to go in the water for work, but in leisure time, if I'm fishing, we've taken the walker then in. So if I kind of lose my balance, I have something to catch myself.
That's very creative. So now, as you're thinking about going forward, how many hours are you working now, and is there any room to extend, or have you actually reached your full-time status?
I'm working full-time now. We were saying sometimes I have to leave early for doctor's appointments, but I mean, it's probably like 37, 38 hours a week for the most part. And I forget the second part of your question. I apologize.
That's okay. I was just saying that as you're thinking about full-time work, you are actually nearly at capacity for what you were doing before.
Correct. So time-wise, there's definitely still projects that we do that are different, like with running and carrying sandbags for different projects. Like I can't do things like that yet. Adaptive equipment I didn't mention. I do have one of those, I think it's like a rollator kind of walker that has the seat on it.
Yes.
So sometimes if we're like baiting different wildlife, I actually have like I've taken that out of the closet and dusted it off so I can put the like tub with the bait on the rollator and kind of roll that to bait because I can't carry it.
That is phenomenal. I like the way you are actually able to use things that have helped folks in many other ways into a very unique way for yourself and for your work. Megan, I want to thank you so much for the time, again, that you've given to us today. And I have seen that determination for a year, and I can see it is definitely going to continue.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Megan, Mary Lee, thank you very much. And now we'll turn it back over to Denise.
Terrific. Hi, everybody. So our guest speaker today, it's my pleasure to introduce Meredith Dodona, who has as you can see, a Master's of Public Health. She's a Senior Policy Advisor for the U.S. Department of Labor in the Office of Disability Employment Policy. She is, we don't have she doesn't have a webcam, so we're going to hear her, but the whole time now you have a picture of she and her beagle, and I did not ask her the beagle's name, though I should have, because I am also a dog person. Meredith has her Master's of Public Health from George Washington University, her BA from AU, and specifically today is going to be talking about stay-at-home return to work, or return to work, stay-at-home. I always do that backwards. Sorry, Meredith. I'm going to kick it to you, and anybody who's got questions, go ahead and use the chat box, the Q&A box. We've already had a couple come in. Thanks so much, and Meredith, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Denise. So I'll cover three things today. I'll give you a brief overview of ODEP for anyone who may not be familiar with us, a little bit of information about NDEAM, or National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and then I'll do a deeper dive on what we call stay at work, return to work. Next slide, please. So ODEP is a small agency. There are 50 or just under people that work in our agency. It was established in 2001, led by an assistant secretary. It is a cabinet level agency. Our mission is to develop and influence policy to increase the number and quality of employment opportunities for people with disabilities. We have policy teams. We have 4 policy teams, communications, and research teams. And the policy areas that we cover include youth, the workforce system, employers, and the employment-related supports team, which is where which is what I'm a part of. Next slide, please. So our elevator speech, if you will, is ODEP is the only non-regulatory federal agency that promotes policies and coordinates with employers in all levels of government to increase workplace success for people with disabilities. Next slide. So October is NDEAM, as Denise so kindly mentioned earlier. NDEAM is a national campaign that raises awareness about disability employment issues and celebrates the many and varied contributions of America's workers with disabilities. It first started in 1945 when Congress declared the first week of October National Employ the Physically Handicapped Week. In 1988, Congress expanded that from a week to a month and renamed it National Disability Employment Awareness Month. This year's theme, as you can see from the poster, is Inclusion Drives Innovation, and it reflects the important role different perspectives play in workforce success. Next slide, please. So we want all of you to be able to celebrate NDEAM locally. So you can either download and print the poster that was on the previous slide. It's available in both English and Spanish, or you can order printed copies, and the URLs for where to do either of those is listed. We also have some ideas and resources about how different groups can recognize NDEAM, and there's a link on the slide for that as well. And we would really love to know how you plan to, or actually do, celebrate NDEAM. So if you are so inclined to share with us, please send an email to Carol Dunlap, and her email is on that slide. Next slide, please. So I'll take a deeper dive now on stay at work and return to work. As background, we know that millions of American workers experience an injury or an illness each year, and hundreds of thousands of those workers later go on to receive state or federal disability benefits. These figures come from a report that ODEP contracted for about 4 years ago, which I can provide if anyone is interested. But the bottom line is, it's a major, it's an issue that affects a lot of people. And to go hand in hand with that, the SSDI trust fund will be depleted by 2034, if not sooner, according to the 2017 annual report of the Social Security and Medicare Board of Trustees. Next slide, please. There's been a lot of coverage about reduced labor force participation in what is called the prime working age range, which is 25 to 54. According to an AEI report, there are 6.6 million workers who are not in the workforce in this range, and that includes 15% of men were not working last year in that age range. We know that women's employment has dropped by 3% since 2000, after consistently rising for several decades prior. And there's a growing concern about the number of disconnected youth, which includes those who are not engaged in either work or school. We know that there's also an association between these factors and reduced labor force participation and the epidemic of opioid abuse and problem of pain management. So there are a lot of issues to consider. So next slide, please. So what do we mean by stay at work and return to work? We're not necessarily talking about the same population that ODEP has worked with in the past. What we're specifically talking about is what we've started calling a work disability. So that would include an injury, illness, or medical condition that is anticipated to inhibit or prevent continued employment or labor force participation. Importantly, that would include both on-the-job injuries or illnesses and off-the-job injuries or illnesses. So the individual would be in the workforce at the time of their injury or illness. So their departure from the labor force would be notable for that reason. What we've also learned is that the affected worker may or may not have an existing disability prior to the onset of a work disability, and they may or may not view themselves as having a disability. Just to put this into context, I'll share a quick personal story. Excuse me. When I was a kid, I had cancer and it weakened my lungs. So periodically, I seem to develop pneumonia. And for me, it's more serious than for your average bear. And this happened recently, actually. But fortunately, ODEP is very, very good at providing accommodations. So I was able to telework, take leave while I was in the hospital and recovering, and also to attend follow-up appointments. And they even went so far as to move my office location in order to reduce my exposure to germs. So that commitment is really important, and it helped me stay at work. So next slide, please. I am just one example. This is a growing problem. We know there are 4 million non-fatal work-related injuries and illnesses annually. Businesses spend a lot of money on associated costs. One estimate puts it 170 billion. And there are related costs due to lost productivity and absenteeism. And that's for work-related. For non-work-related injuries, for off-the-job injuries, in 2013, there were that resulted in approximately 240 million days of lost production time. So it's a growing problem. Next slide, please. And I can provide the sources for those figures if anyone is interested. So that is the business impact. There's also an impact on the public. Andrew and John covered the September employment statistics earlier. You'll see the August statistics on the slide because the September ones only came out this morning, so I wasn't able to update them. But you can also see the 2016 Social Security disability insurance statistics, over 2.3 million applications, 32% of which were awarded benefits, and those are new applications, so contributing to a total beneficiary population of over 8.8 million, with a hefty sum of benefits paid over the course of the year. And we want those benefits to be available to people who need them, absolutely, which is why it's important to help people like myself stay at work if we can. Next slide, please. So this is a graph that we found from a RAND study that just kind of graphically depicts how the timing of interventions makes a huge difference with respect to individuals returning to work rather than applying for or going on SSDI benefits. You'll see that the longer someone is out of work, the less work capacity they have, and the time between onset of a disability, a work disability, and the exercise decision can be quite long. Next slide, please. So with that background, ODEP established the Stay at Work, Return to Work Policy Collaborative in 2013. It just wrapped up, so we had it operating for 4 years. It consisted of a community of practice and policy work groups that were led by subject matter experts, informed by the community practice, and they conducted online dialogues and webinars, and they produced policy action papers as well as resources to support adoption and implementation of their recommendations. We tried to include a broad number of entities in the community of practice, including disability management experts, employers and industry associations, worker associations, public sector entities, and researchers. Next slide, please. So these are some of the topics that we covered in the past. There are more. I encourage you to visit our website. The link is at the bottom of the slide to check them out. But we looked at everything from what's the role of the physician in the return to work process, and how do you target interventions effectively? What options do states have for promoting stay at work and return to work? I'll come back to this COHE workers' compensation model, but we've looked at that twice. And this past year, we looked at musculoskeletal injuries and pain management, as well as strategies to facilitate return to work. Next slide, please. So we've had a couple key lessons. The first one being that timing is really everything. It's critical to intervene at the appropriate time. Ideally, that would occur while an injured worker is still attached to their employer, so they can stay at work. But you definitely want to reach them before they've applied for SSDI, because the research indicates that once a person has applied for SSDI, they're really unlikely to
Meredith, it sounds like we lost your audio. Yeah, Meredith, we've lost your audio. I hear Denise, I think.
Yeah, would somebody drop Meredith the phone number? It looks like she got cut off. Perhaps we can do, there were a couple of questions in the chat box. Maybe we can take those while she calls back in.
Okay.
Yeah, they look like they're for one of you guys, John or Andrew.
Let me get them back up. They were similar. Where'd they go? Chat. All right, so one person asked, with the overall job loss and the softer increase in the ratio and labor force participation rate for the general population, why do you think disability numbers are stronger? Well, one of the things that the recession was known for at the very beginning was, particularly men over 50 had a very difficult time returning to work after job loss due to the recession. And so that was, I suspect that that's one of the reasons why that the unemployment rate, there's very few people in the market, and that employers, may be looking for alternative sources. I guess I could put my video on. Looking for alternative sources of employees. I don't know what it's like around the rest of the country. I suspect it's very similar in many places in the country. There are help wanted signs all over the place in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. And so I think that's one of the things that could be driving this, is simply the overall macroeconomy is pushing. I'd love to see the numbers for men over 50, because they really had suffered a great deal of job loss, and see if they're recovering similar to New Hampshire, or similar to people without disabilities. Another question is, why do you think recovery from the recession for people with disabilities has been easier this time around versus past? You know, I'm trying to remember what I said. You know, I'm still not convinced that people with disabilities have recovered. If we went back to that long-term time trend, I'm starting to get convinced. But I would really like to see a long sustained recovery, you know, more than 1 month or 2 months, or I guess it would be 6 months now, where we really saw a rise above kind of the standard low that we had seen. And so I would, before I would call it a recovery, I'd like to see a few more months. But it's looking positive, that's for sure. Why would I think it's easier? Well, I could hypothesize. I can't tell you the real reasons. My thoughts would be the first things to check would be whether technology and accommodation matter. So this may be a time for when the ADA really shows its benefit. That during a recession, workers with disabilities are more likely to regain work after losing it during a recession. Although the rise in Social Security disability applications is true, which may be pulling some people out of the labor market.
Hey, Andrew, I think we have Meredith back.
Okay.
Can we flip to her again to finish her slides, and then we can go back to questions?
Sure thing. Meredith,
I think you're on mute. So if you unmute, I think you're good.
Okay.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
You're good. Go ahead.
So sorry about that, everyone. I got disconnected. So we were talking about timing and how important that is. Next slide, please. Communication is also important. There are a lot of different players in the recovery and stay at work, return to work process. So outreach and coordination among all those players is important, and that would include employers, injured workers, insurers, both regular healthcare insurers and workers' comp insurers, as well as healthcare providers. Next slide, please. And this is where it gets more complicated. Our third key takeaway from the Policy Collaborative is that coordination and collaboration at the systems level is really important, because when someone is injured or dealing with a medical condition, oftentimes they're navigating multiple complicated systems, and that really increases opportunities to fall through the cracks. So these systems could include workers' comp, the healthcare system. Dealing with insurance separate from your healthcare provider is also complicated. Sometimes VR may be involved. The workforce development system, possibly state disability insurance systems as well, depending on what state you're in. So what was determined is that, at least for the time being, it's more effective and certainly more efficient to fix the cracks in those systems rather than to fix the cracks in the safety net below them. Although long term, of course, we'll work toward that goal. So next slide, please. So looking ahead, what ODEP is doing, we have a number of activities going on. We have been facilitating interagency efforts to try and increase our coordination and collaboration. Included in that, we're exploring partnerships around data sharing to help inform the work that we do. We have some contracts for knowledge building research to continue building the evidence base. ODEP has another project called SEED, the State Exchange on Employment and Disability, and we are working through them to do some stay at work, return to work efforts, specifically focused on at the state level. And we have the potential for some demonstration grants. I'm very excited. We have a request for information open right now. It's open through October 30th. We'd really like to get your input on that. The link is on the slide. If you can go to the next slide, please. I'll tell you a little bit about them. So in the President's fiscal year 2018 budget, there was a request for funding for what were called early demonstration interventions. So obviously we don't have the full year's budget yet, so we don't know what they will look like for sure, or may look like. But the idea is to provide funds to states to improve the labor force participation of people who become injured or ill while they're employed. That could be on the job or off the job in our current thinking. It's testing key features of a collaborative care workers' compensation model, as well as associated employment-related programs that are connected to that workers' compensation model. And we're, of course, interested in applications outside workers' comp, which would include the off-the-job injuries and illnesses. And so I mentioned previously that I would come back to the COHE workers' compensation model. COHE is the Centers for Occupational Health and Education. They operate out of Washington State, and that is our jumping off point for developing these demonstrations. Again, we have a request for information open. We're looking for as much public input as we can get. So I encourage all of you to, jot down this link and check it out and share your thoughts with us. And with that, next slide. Happy to take any questions, or you can follow up with me later if you'd like. Thanks so much.
I'm going to put that next slide, that last slide up, so that people can take down that web address. So we have a few minutes for questions. We do have
back one more slide.
Oh, I'm on the slide that has the back one more.
Yeah.
That
there
one?
it is.
There
Perfect.
it is. Okay,
Yep.
the Federal Register one. Good. So I want to make sure people get that web address. So there's one question from someone online. What can employers do to keep workers in the labor force after injury, or keep them connected so they don't apply for SSDI? So that sounds like a question for you, Meredith. What can employers do?
I think there's a lot of things that employers can do. I would have to say it depends. Depends on the nature of the employer and the work that is done. But in general, workplace flexibility around scheduling so that people can attend appointments that they need to in order to fully recover, providing accommodations that may be necessary in the workplace. That's always helpful. In some cases, light duty or modified work would be appropriate. These are good questions, but I think there are a lot of options that are available depending on what the type of job is. It'll vary a little bit. Obviously, it would be different for someone in a more office-based setting than someone who, for example, may work construction.
Right. One of the things that from my personal experience as a family member of somebody who suffered a traumatic brain injury recently, is that, as I think you said, Meredith, the system is so complex. The complexity of what people are facing, just having to navigate between physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, primary care physician, neurological visits, rehab doctor visits. It's such a massive undertaking sometimes to recover after injury. And one thing I think employers could definitely do is, besides being inviting and expect people to come back to work and invite people to come back to work for sure, would be on the family medical leave side. Many of these systems are so complex that it takes family members to help an individual manage that. And when my son was injured, it took 3 months before I found out whether I was covered under family medical leave. The process took forever. And that may be just the University of New Hampshire, but I imagine that it might be other places as well. And so the complexity is really hard to deal with. And I think employers, as you said, Meredith, it really depends on each person's situation and each employer. But it's
right. And of course there are restrictions around what can be shared and who an employer can talk to. But I think, reaching out to the employee, to an affected employee, at least, and letting them know that they are supported and that you, as an employer, want to work with them to facilitate their return is important, because they may be very overwhelmed dealing just with the medical side of things, and the thought of trying to figure out how they're going to get back to work.
That's right.
May be really daunting.
Right. Okay, well that's all the time we have for today. If people have additional questions or want to talk to any of us, our emails are available, and you could always contact us here at the University of New Hampshire. I want to thank everybody, Meredith and the others who participated at Helsel. With that, I'll draw it to a close. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you next month.